this is the last session of the conference, fortunately and unfortunately, because on the one hand, sorry, we are all a bit tired. On the other hand, it has been so interesting that it would be really good to have opportunity to talk more on the topics. The panel title today now is Cultural Memory and Natural Disasters, and we will have 5 panelists, each of them speaking for 20 minutes. That leaves us about 20 minutes for a discussion. Still, let's try to be in time with the presentations. So the first speaker is Naum Trajanowski, who is an adjunct assistant professor at the Faculty of Sociology at University of Warsaw. His major interests include historical sociology and the history of sociology in Central and East and Southeast Europe, nationalism and memory studies. He cooperated with the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity on numerous projects and with the Macedonian Academy of Sciences and Arts in Skopje and the Faculty of Philosophy in Skopje. He co-chairs the Southeast Europe Regional Group of the Memory Studies Association. And recently he co-edited a collection of oral history interviews related to the 1963 Skopje earthquake. And Naum will speak about imagining the city of solidarity, the cultural memory of the 1963 Skopje earthquake, and the post-earthquake urban reconstruction.
Yeah. Many thanks, Małgorzata. Is this working?
Not yet. Continue. If you continue, it should start working.
Yes, it's working right now?
Yes.
Okay, and I need the thing for the PowerPoint presentation. I'm not sure if it's on or. Okay. Okay. So let me just start in media res due to due to the fact that it's a relatively long panel. And I have quite much to show you. So on the early morning of June 26, 1963, an earthquake struck the Macedonian capital of Skopje. And its magnitude was established as 6.1 degrees according to the Richter scale, while the zone of damage, or the macroseismic center, happened to be Skopje's very city center, which you can see above me, actually. And in a way that this shallow shock in the densely populated area was crucial for the catastrophic consequences of the earthquake. So according to the official data, it killed 1,070 people, 46 of them being foreign nationals, while the first reports present an approximation of around 2,000 injured, a number which grew up to 4,000 at a certain point, and approximately 10,000 people trapped under the ruins. It also destroyed approximately 2,000 housing units, approximately 40 objects of public interest, and more than 30 cultural and historical monuments, or in total, around 2/3 of the urban fabric of the city. The total damage, in a way, rose to up to 15% of the annual federal budget of then Yugoslavia. The tremors continued with lesser intensities during the following days and months. And only in July, practically the next month, there were 322 aftershocks in Skopje and the surrounding area, while the number rose up to 400 by 1st January 1964. The largest of them were felt some 300 kilometers away from the city. The catastrophe, the disaster, as we heard previously, and especially during the roundtable discussion today, was met with this kind of typical rescue operation involving the army, first and foremost, but also other organized and less organized reactions. So from the local population of Macedonia and especially the surrounding Yugoslav republics, and in a way this continued during the following days, resulting with some 30,000 children being evacuated from the city. The elders were sent to shelters around the city as well, and the city was practically left only with those who were able to help with the rescue. What followed, and this is most probably something which might ring a bell, was this call for help to the torn city, which was picked up by more than 80 states and a number of international organizations across the globe. And this, in a way, was a result of the leverage of the non-aligned Yugoslavia at that point. But in a way, it was also very much context-based. So you have to have in mind the Cold War crisis and the Cuban Missile Crisis, especially from the late 1962. But also another critical context was the criticism, in a way, towards the international community, which, and in a way, especially towards its responses to the Agadir earthquake in 1960, which occurred in Morocco. So in this context, and this is very important, the UN saw the earthquake in the third largest Yugoslav city as an extraordinary opportunity to promote reconciliation between the ideological blocs in the name of basic human solidarity. So the UN immediately afterwards stood behind the urban reconstruction project in terms of both funding and logistics, and in a way it was imagined as a sort of endeavor which will also involve local experts. And here I would like to single out Ines Stolic, who did a fantastic job in the UN archives, and she published this book in Italian, I believe, so far. The federal and the local authorities, in turn, welcomed this decision and sought, like, kind of in a way, sought to host the internationals with its new byname. So prepared the scene with the new byname of the City of Solidarity. And in a way, this episode of transnational solidarity in disaster management and urban reconstructions of the city stood up within the international politics of the 60s and the 70s, showing the many potentials of the liberal and the socialist exchanges and cooperation. So today, I will briefly present you a part of my doctoral thesis, which aimed at showing the local entanglements with solidarity in a course of a longer period of time. So both as a city brand, as I mentioned, but also as a social bond understood in this rather classic sociological sense. So I started looking at the annual commemorations of the earthquake in a kind of longer perspective from 1964 actually, up to 2021, 22, and it soon appeared to me that they not only embodied the struggles to establish a sort of a memory narrative as a dominant in the particular local context, but they also reflected in a way another sort of dynamic, one which is beyond this kind of event-centered production of memory narratives. And this, of course, was related to the second aspect of solidarity, which I mentioned, and those are these very social adjustments after a natural disaster, which are occurring after a natural disaster and during a massive, in a way, urban reconstruction, as it was the case in Skopje. So what I did, I drew upon practically a literature, mostly of sociology of events, but also philosophy of events, and the emerging kind of critical event studies, as a way, as means for assessing this ongoingness of event, the beyond evental effects, as in Berezin or Wagner specificity, for instance. And this is in a way a slow memory opening to this kind of situation, as it not only allows us to kind of grasp the post-eventual development, but also act in a way, in a very interesting way, in a retrospect. So it structures the past practically in the pre-evental history, so one can say. So this was also the main idea behind the project of collecting oral histories about the earthquake, which we did in the course of 2021, which was an undertaking practically the first in its kind, as it gathered recollections not only from the dominant ethnic group of Macedonians, but also the minority groups of Roma, Albanian, and Turkish population of the city. So with the locals, we discussed several aspects of their biographical experiences in a sort of a semi-structural manner, episodic narrative interviews focusing on the impact of the event, to use this famous term, but also in terms of these flashbulb memories, their urban experiences, the way that the earthquake and the reconstruction impacted the families, but also local communities and so on. And in a way, we also organized a roundtable discussion in Skopje. It was more or less in the later stages of the pandemics, which in a way aimed at positioning Skopje as this meeting point, again, anew, for different approaches of post-catastrophic cities. So on one hand, acknowledging wartime destructions, such as Le Havre, for instance, but also Sarajevo, as well as other kind of episodes of cities hit by or struck by earthquakes, such as Banja Luka, Podgorica, also several flood disasters in Romania in the course of the 70s and so on. And in the end, we published this book, which you can see here, which also contained, in a way, an overview of the personal accounts appearing in the Macedonian media as of 63, as yet another format allowing for personal, in a way, recollections to reach certain publics. And I will show very briefly afterwards one such example. So today, in a way, in this very presentation-friendly format, I will try to present very briefly the contours, the coordinates of the three phases, which I actually mapped out, related mostly to the commemorative activities in Skopje. And the first one is related to this early post-war earthquake years and shows how the years, of course, set the coordinates for what happened in the course of the next 2 decades. So it also shows these initial deliberations about the urgency. So for instance, I looked at the daily bulletins reporting the reconstruction, which were published up to 65, if I remember correctly, 66. And they are very, very nicely showing how the local authorities, for instance, tended to narrate the disaster in local terms in the beginning. So mostly resonating with slogans, with mottos within the Yugoslav Federation. So, for instance, the local the post-earthquake urgency was narrated mostly within the Brotherhood and Unity slogan, which was in a way this supranational call for action during the Second World War, but also it kind of translated into this main interethnic principle for the post-war federation. And it soon appeared, just slightly before the first annual commemoration of the earthquake, that this notion of solidarity kind of showed this larger potential, not only to encompass the memory of the deceased, but also the memory of the help from the Yugoslav republics and citizens, and as especially important, this intensified internationalism present in the city after the catastrophe. And two events are very illustrative here. As you can see on the picture here, there was this monument, 26th of July, by Georgi Gruin, erected at the alley of the victims of the Skopje earthquake. This is, of course, the main city cemetery of Butal. And it might ring a bell, this brutal edifice that was a sort of prevailing memorial language of Yugoslavia at the point, sort of abstract-looking, futuristic, if I may, as well, which was mostly related to wartime experiences, but it was also used in this particular context to narrate certain struggles related to a natural disaster. Another important monument from this period, from the early post-earthquake years, is the film Skopje 63, which was directed by Veljko Buljajic, one of the leading directors of the so-called Yugoslav Red Wave at that point, which emerged to be even more famous in the course of the decade. And he was famous for depicting this wartime rescue action. So in a way, this might be the link for this particular setting. And it's very interesting to this is the movie which premiered at Cannes. It's nowadays voted as one of the top Croatian documentaries in the history. And it's also the movie which depicts the scene of a Soviet and American soldier shaking hands for the first time after the Second World War in Skopje. So this is also one of the symbolic values of the movie nowadays. But in a way, it was also interesting for me to see how the local authorities actually narrated the touring of the film within the city and within the country afterwards. And it was interesting to see, and I believe I heard a similar sentence previously during the roundtable discussion, that it's a film which depicts not only, it's not a mere tragedy, but it's also something much more than this. These are the actual words of the city mayor at that point. So now I just want to, like, within the frame of this particular initial period, I want to show you one other illustration of how this sort of duality between the past and the future was narrated in the Macedonian media. So you can see here one of the, it's Hotel Macedonia. It was one of the buildings which got destroyed in the earthquake, killing almost all its guests. So this is practically a photo immediately after the earthquake, and this as well is a reportage done by a Slovene photographer at that point. And it's starting to get interesting once you look at how this particular episode was, in a way, narrated in the media in 64, 65. So in 64, you have a Danish couple who arrived in the city to celebrate their second birthday. So they were guests in the hotel, but nevertheless, they survived, and they arrived in June 1964 in order to, in a way, appreciate their it was narrated as a way of appreciating what was happening in Skopje. So, as an appreciation, as a token of appreciation to New Skopje. And as well, this is an interesting segment, as it also shows as you can read from the oral history account, this segment, that it shows a person who, in a way, was framed within these categories of, on one hand, the tremor, the tragedy, the flashbulb, the first impressions, and on the other hand, in a way, the new Skopje, the future, and the whole idea behind reconstructing the capital city. So the next phase stretches from the stoppage, from the halt of the reconstruction project due to the economic crisis in Yugoslavia, which occurred mostly in the early 80s, actually in late 70s, early 80s, up to the year of 2000. And it's very interesting because it's a very atypical periodization. I mean, it goes beyond the Yugoslav dissolution, which in a way it was a formative event for many different aspects, but in this particular context, it does not function like this. So in a way, it's important to be noted that the crisis halted not only the reconstruction, but also all the supportive activities in Skopje, which were related to the like these festivities around the earthquake. So, for instance, the Solidarity Days were ceased to exist, and so on. So I'm seeing the time, and I'm trying to be as fast as possible. So what remained in this particular period was, on one hand, to focus on these past accomplishments of the reconstruction, which as of 1980, or Tito's death, started to accent in a way his pivotal role. So in a way, it's kind of this event was also influencing the way the earthquake was narrated in this particular time period. And as I said, stressing his particular agency. And it's very interesting because I found one kind of discussion of the Skopje City Council meeting prior to the earthquake in '83, which is again around anniversary, when they kind of decided which delegation should go to Butal, so the cemetery, and immediately afterwards to the Tito's grave in Belgrade. What is more important in a way about this particular period is that as of the 80s started this sort of alternative voices about the post-earthquake reconstruction in Skopje, which are very much related to the general city plan for the city, which eventually got approved in 1985. At the annual commemorations of the earthquake prior to that, expert voices were stressing that the modernist and functionalist planning had its own benefits at the time, but the city should eventually kind of reconsider its traditional, as it was put, traditional constructing legacies. And it's very interesting to see how this object of the officers' hall from the very city center, which you can see here, which was severely destroyed during the damage in a way during the earthquake, but destroyed immediately afterwards as a sort of a symbolic object of the first Yugoslavia, the Serbian rule in Macedonia. So this object kind of emerged as anchor of the locals' recollection of the about the pre-earthquake city, and this was something which, of course, was among the references of the so-called traditional constructing legacies. This, but also other similar things. So one important aspect about the early 90s was that with the Yugoslav dissolution, this might be the juncture here. There was a sort of intensification of this critical discourse about the way the post-earthquake reconstruction went, but also there was this new, in a way, securitizing discourse, which was reflecting very much the ontological security of the local population of then Republic of Macedonia in the 90s. So in a way, in this very context of the state being contested from many and different sides, the media started to practically write about whether a possibility of a new earthquake is a real threat for Skopje. So this is already happening very much from the 90s. The final period, and this is of course something which you might also be aware of. So it's in a way the juncture here is 2001, the year when a series of armed hostilities in Macedonia took place, in a way between the Albanian radical groups and Macedonian state security forces. And it's also an important background here are the two democratic changes for the first time in the political history of the country, which twice brought a sort of a right-wing coalition to power. And it's very interesting to see how the conservative agenda, in a way, was met halfway with this sort of critical voices related to the post-earthquake reconstruction after the city emerging as of the 80s. And in the early 2000s, this, for instance, the museum of the city of Skopje was targeted in a way, in a series of very interesting strip away of the message of Tito, which was considered to be one of the most important memory sites after the earthquake. But afterwards, especially after the mid 2000s, in a way, it got kind of embodied into this mega constructing project of Skopje 2014, which is an umbrella term, of course, of more than 130 memorials and monuments which got erected in the city center of Skopje. What is interesting again was that the constructing project was also targeting the socialist modernist legacy, as you can see here. So this is how the central post office was covered in a pseudo-classicist or neo-Baroque way. The attributes are varying and the discussion is ongoing. But nevertheless, it's important to see that this sort of legacy was targeted. On the other hand, this particular period also provoked, and if I have maybe 30 more seconds and I'm finishing here, it provoked two particular set of reactions which I'm covering in much detail in my thesis, and the two of them are related to kind of re-exploration of memories of the earthquake especially, and also the post-earthquake reconstruction as a sort of a response to these constructing activities related to the Skopje 2014 project. So one of them, very briefly, is a very interesting local mobilization, which ended up in a referenda, which eventually was successful, which in a way mobilized the locals, and it was a first kind of massive reaction related towards the project, and successful one, and it mobilized them on the basis of the local memories related to a particular object from the from the city center. On the other hand, it's very interesting to see how the targeted museums as of the 90s and the early 2000s appear to be one of the key actors kind of conveying the message against this particular project. And here, of course, most important are two particular managerial institutions and managements related to the Museum of the City of Skopje and the Museum of the Modern Arts in Skopje, which is also a Polish present after the earthquake. So I'll stop here. Thanks again. I'm looking forward for your questions and comments.
Dziękuję now. Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Gretchen Abuzo, who teaches in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Xavier University in the Philippines. Now she's undertaking a PhD in sociology at the University of the Philippines, and she is also a member of the working group Transformation of Environment of the Coast Action Project Slow Memory. Hello, Gretchen. Are you there with us?
Hello, hello. I don't know what time is it there. Can you hear me?
It's 12 past 5 p.m. What time is it at your place?
Oh, yeah. I was asking if we can hear. Yeah, it's 12 in the morning.
Okay.
November
Thank
25. Anyway.
Thank you for being with us. I will just present the title of your presentation.
Okay.
It's Disaster Memories in the Global South, Visual Evidence of Typhoon Washi in the Philippines. And please, the floor is yours.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I don't know what time it is there. So, maayong gabi sa tanan. That's good evening, everyone. Yeah, so, like I said, it's already past midnight in the Philippines. But I would like to express my gratitude for allowing me to present my paper. I'm actually very happy to be presenting my paper, and I already consumed enough coffee, so I'll be awake for the next 2 days. So thank you so much for allowing me to present my paper. So as mentioned in the title, there is a case in the Philippines. So I'm looking for I'm looking forward to, of course, I'm happy to share my paper, but I'm really also looking forward to any comments from you, about my paper. So okay. So my presentation will attempt to discuss and by the way, please you can interrupt me if I'm going over time. Okay. So my presentation attempts to discuss the main point raised in the conference which is on how individuals cope with the memory of traumatic large-scale events and how memory and reality of dramatic past events are experienced and worked through at a collective level. For this particular presentation, like I said, I will focus on the case of a typhoon that happened in our country, which I will explain later. So the basic point of my paper is I will discuss how our city remembers its past, in particular a natural disaster that happened in the city. So let me first introduce this natural disaster, which is Typhoon Washi, or local name Sendong. So from here on, I will refer to Typhoon Washi as Sendong, which happened in my hometown in 2011. Do I have another? Okay, so Sendong ravaged through southern Philippines and hit major cities like my hometown Cagayan de Oro, and its neighboring city Iligan on December 16, 2011 until the early morning of December 17, 2011. And that particular typhoon, its devastation made international headlines, and these are just the examples of how it was presented in the international news. So this particular slide, this is the one that I will present to show you the summary of what happened. So Sendong is considered as one of the major typhoons that happened in the Philippines. So it is, and so you can see there the maximum strength was 75 kilometers per hour, and it is considered alongside Typhoon Haiyan. So Haiyan is the strongest typhoon to have hit the Philippines. So along with Haiyan, Typhoon Sendong is considered among the strongest typhoons that hit the country. So Sendong in particular had a death toll of more than 1,268. There were more than 4,000 that were injured, and about 241 were their bodies were never found. And uh, and you have there the in billions, what do you say? So billions, 2 billion pesos damage due to the typhoon. So let me just present uh, yeah, where our city is. So I live in Cagayan de Oro. This is my hometown, and this is located in the southern Philippines. But this is in the northern part of the island Mindanao. So we are called in the southern. Southern Philippines, but northern Mindanao. So I will focus on the impact and the memory of Sendong in my hometown. Uh, and my city, you can see there, there's a big river there. One of the central features of our city is the river that runs across the city. Cagayan River is a central feature in the city landscape. It is an important landmark and important resource for the locals. It is used for livelihood, transportation, and tourism. And as I will mention later on, it will figure prominently in the Sendong disaster. I will skip that one. So let me see. I think I missed. Okay, I think I'm sharing the wrong slide. Okay, so before Sendong happened, I'll just show this one. Okay, so before Sendong happened, there was a vibrant community that was located along the Cagayan River. So you cannot show it there, but in the past there were really a lot of houses beside the river. So during the tenure of Mayor Vicente Emano, who is now deceased, houses made of light materials were allowed to proliferate in these areas, which you cannot see it there anymore because it's a more latest photo. So these areas where there were a lot of informal settlements, these houses were allowed to be built by families because these families, these people who lived in these informal settlements, were known to be the electoral base of our former mayor. He had a very strong hold in our city, and he had been the mayor since 1998. So it was only after Sendong when these areas in the river that were finally cleared of houses and residents were moved to resettlement sites in various parts of the city. So, okay, 2 years later, in the 2013 elections, the former mayor Emano lost his bid for a fifth term as mayor, and his loss was directly correlated to the impact of the typhoon in the city. So, today, more than a decade since, much of the evidence of the Sendong disaster is barely visible, and Cagayan de Oro has changed physically and politically. Thus, in this presentation, I will present the subtle visual memories of Sendong as still seen in the urban spaces of my city. And I argue that these memories reflect what the local government and residents had learned from the natural disaster. So first, I will present. So the two types of disaster memories that I will present are the disaster memorials and an abandoned space as an example of a disaster memory. So first, I will present two memorials dedicated to the memory of Sendong. So let me just give a definition of what is disaster memorial according to Anne Eyre. Uh, According to her, disaster memorials are permanent memorials, which are physical reminders that had been constructed as a way of remembering forever disasters and their legacy. They are also considered the collective symbols commemorating the event and its significance. And so disaster memorials can perform several functions, and these are some of them. So disaster memorials can function as carriers of messages, and usually the message is a call to remember the past and to learn from that event. The disaster memorials are also serve to mark that event as very significant in the history of a city or a society. Memorials also serve as recognition of the loss and suffering of the victims and survivors. So, yeah, and disaster memorials are also, especially those that are placed in public spaces would, for example, do I have an example here? Okay, like for example, this one. So disaster memorials, when they are placed in public spaces, would allow non-victims like myself to pay tribute to the victims and participate in the history of the city. So that is called by Zerubbabel as mnemonic community. So um, I think Christina Simco also proposed the notion of memorials as central carriers of marginalized groups. This is applicable in the case of Sendong victims who perished due to the gross negligence of local governments. Sendong victims, most of them had lived beside the river, which had already been declared by the national government as hazardous areas. However, as I mentioned a while ago, informal settlements were allowed to proliferate in these flood prone areas and were tolerated and even encouraged by the local government before Sendong. Many of the electoral base which I had mentioned of the former mayor were the ones who died in Sendong, while much of the residents of the city in the uptown areas were fast asleep. Their deaths due to Sendong further highlights that victims of natural disasters tend to come from the most marginalized sector. So in the case of Sendong memorials, the memorials serve as their voice of the marginalized victims of natural disasters. I'm sorry, I will skip this one. So for this paper, in the next slides, I will present two disaster memorials and try to evaluate them based on the functions I mentioned. So I think this is the slide. Okay, so at the heart of the city, and which is located across our city's cathedral and the city hall, I think it's on the upper right. Yeah. So that is the Sendong Memorial Wall, which was erected a year before because Sendong happened in 2011. So this was erected in 2012. So the inscription on that memorial wall reads that so the inscription there reads, "Earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot heal, in memory of those who perished during the rampage of Typhoon Sendong in Cagayan de Oro last December 17, 2011. And when you look at the memorial wall more closely, majority of the names that are etched in the wall share the same family names. So together with the inscription that describes Sendong as rampage, this particular memorial provides the haunting details of how victims died that night, meaning they were families who were fast asleep when the floodwaters had rampaged through their city. Our city is actually unaccustomed to typhoons. In fact, this is one of the advertisements of our city to attract investors, like come and invest in our city because we are typhoon free. So that was true up until Sendong happened. So when during the night of Sendong, the government did not issue an evacuation order on the night when Sendong made landfall. So in the early morning of December 17, the catastrophic effect of Sendong was seen. A total or more than 1,000 individuals had died, many of them women and children who were on the path of the typhoon. So what happened was that the rainwaters had increased the height of the river from its normal level of 2 meters to 10 meters. The floodwaters flowed at high speeds, carrying large debris such as logs, boulders, mud, and struck at everything and anything that crossed its path. That particular death count, by the way, the 1,268, does not include the 181 in at least in the city victims whose bodies were never found. And so the location of the memorial wall, which is at the center of the city and across the city's cathedral and city hall, so this memorial wall poignantly serves as the tombstone for the victims whose bodies were never recovered and the site where survivors can still pay respect to their family members who had died. The second memorial I will show is an interesting one because this one is dedicated to a mango tree, which is located in Isla de Oro. So I will discuss further what is Isla de Oro later. So Isla de Oro is an islet. So the photo here, so I hope it's clear. So there's something here, there's something concrete here. So that is that stands on a small island called Isla de Oro. So this Isla de Oro is an islet situated in the middle of Cagayan River. In the middle of Isla de Oro, this memorial is dedicated to a mango tree, which was erected because it is said that the tree had saved more, at least 50 people. And the inscription is there. So if it's not clear, so I will read it out. So the inscription on this memorial says, "The tree of life. This mango tree saved more than 50 people, residents of Isla de Oro, at the height of the unprecedented flooding caused by tropical storm Sendong last December 16, 2011. This inscription serves as an account of how people survived the rush of floodwaters during Sendong. With their houses swept by the flood, more than 50 people had to cling to the mango tree to save their lives." So, compared to the houses that are in Isla de Oro, uh, this mango tree is firmly rooted on the ground and stood higher than the floodwaters. So, looking at the height of the mango tree and compared to the height of the people, you can just imagine how high the floodwaters had went up during that night. So, in terms of the Sendong memorials I have presented, they are consistent with being disaster memorials because they are built as permanent reminders of Sendong and the fatality that it caused to the city's population. These memorials are built in public sites which are meant to be visited by survivors, by residents, and all who want to pay tribute. The placement of these memorials in public places facilitates the purpose of disaster memorials as symbols of the past that can be shared by the community. However, the design and inscription of these memorials is limited to the purpose of just being reminders, and they do not serve this educational purpose or warnings about disaster preparedness. So, in the last few slides, I will discuss an abandoned space, which I would discuss as a form of a disaster memory. So, I think I will skip that. So the Tree of Life, which I had mentioned a while ago, is located in Isla de Oro. So here's an aerial view of it. And this is from Google Earth dated June 2011, which is 6 months before Sendong. So beyond the, I hope it's clear, but beyond the cloudy skies, you can see structures littered all over this small islet. And during this time, so before Sendong, there were 500 families or an estimated 7,000 people that were living in the area. So at least when Sendong came, the majority of these structures were wiped out as the entire islet was swallowed by the floodwaters. The news later says that 44 residents had died, and the mango tree mentioned a while ago saved 50 lives. So one might ask, how did this particular spot in the middle of the river came to be called home by thousands of people? And after Sendong, what does its present state tell us about what the city and its former residents learned from the disaster? So, like many cities, Cagayan de Oro started as a settlement that grew along the river. However, as decades had passed and the population grew, the surrounding areas of the riverbanks became cramped with houses and establishments and could no longer accommodate any more settlers. This is when this swath of land across the river, eventually called Isla de Oro, became an attractive site to build a life for the new settlers. What its early settlers had chose to dismiss was that Isla de Oro was merely a patch of land that occasionally emerged when the water receded at low tide in the river. So during the tenure of our former mayor, a socialized program granted land titles to households in Isla de Oro. These policies encouraged the urban poor whose houses made of light materials to dwell in these risky areas. So this is not now. So this is a photo taken in 2018, so still Google Earth. So about 7 years after Sendong. So I hope sorry. It's the green, yeah, it's in the middle of the river. So this is Isla de Oro in 2018. The islet is still above surface level of the river. Only this time, instead of houses littered all over the area, the islet is filled with some sort of greenery, somewhat defying its description as a mere sandbar. In just 7 years, Isla de Oro looks to have replenished itself with vegetation and healthy plant life, making it appear starkly different from its surrounding area. And if you notice, it is the only green patch of land that is empty of any built structures in the middle of the city. However, the emptiness of Isla de Oro and its history of being a site of the Sendong disaster does not mean that it had been completely rejected by its inhabitants. So actually, its former inhabitants, so if you, this was right after Sendong, the same inhabitants actually attempted to come back to to Isla de Oro. So after Sendong, the local government prohibited survivors to return to their communities. Our president back then, National President Benigno Aquino, declared these areas permanently no-build zones. However, the relocation sites for the survivors who used to live there were built in areas that were physically distant from the city center. Many of the former inhabitants worked in the informal sector like market vendors or rickshaw drivers. These livelihoods had required them to reside near or at the city center. That's the reason why its former inhabitants rejected the resettlement sites and wanted to come back to this area. So the only reason why Isla de Oro remains to be empty today is because of the strict mandate from the national government and a change in mayor. So the new mayor passed local ordinances that imposed severe punishments such as monetary penalty and imprisonment to anyone who would violate the no build policy. So this is why Isla de Oro, despite it's like a prime location in the middle of the city, but it still remains empty today. So actually, that's my last slide. Um, do I have okay. So in terms of the memory for this particular disaster, I would say, and of course, I welcome your comments later on. No? The memory was really created. I would not say the disaster memorials because, like I said, they didn't really they were just markers that the Sendong happened. But what really um, created more compelling memory of Sendong is really the policies of the government that impose that you have to learn from the past and not to come back to that area. But I would also welcome your comments later on. Thank you very much. I hope I was able to give you something significant tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gretchen. It was a very interesting talk, and thank you for telling us about how natural disaster is commemorated. This relates a bit to the roundtable discussion that we just had before this session, but also for showing how environment and nature becomes agent in both historical processes like the tree that rescued people, and also agent in commemorative processes like the abandoned land. This is very interesting. And now we are moving to the next presentation. This will be Hans Gutbrod, who is associate professor at Ilia State University. Together with his colleagues Hans, he led a high-impact campaign to increase the transparency of research funding Transparify. He previously was the regional director of the Caucasus Research Center, and he has been working also in the Caucasus region since 1999 and holds a PhD in international relations from the London School of Economics. His book on ethics of political commemoration towards a new paradigm will appear in the summer of 2023. He is on Twitter as Hans Gutbrod. This is what you put into your biogram. Thank you for that. And hello, Hans. And this is the topic of your presentation. Presentation is the 2015 Tbilisi zoo flooding, exploring the ethics of political commemoration.
Thank you. And yes, indeed, that so to speak, that was the bio. Sorry, I'm now going back. That was a bit of a swirl. I'm sorry I cannot be in Warsaw. I was there last year for the conference, which I enjoyed very much. But but it was also a commemoration event here in Georgia just this weekend, and so I couldn't actually combine that. So since I had it in the paper, it's almost expanded a little bit as an issue, and it ties into some of the things that Gretchen talked about, and also talks into the earthquake theme that we talked about. And the title that I ended up choosing, Adapting, is one that is on hippos, as I say, hippos, heroes, and the Georgian manslaughter state. So that's, of course, a strong statement that you will see there. And in the background, you see the map, mostly of Georgia, the country. Sometimes Georgia, the state, comes up when you look at it. And I asked about how do some of the really signature disasters of the last 10 years, how do they fit into a process of a kind of a national accountability? So I zoom maybe one step even out beyond what Gretchen has done in asking that question, because I'm also interested in that policy. Now that connects to the work that David Wood and I have done on ethics of political commemoration, where we say to really judge how good, so to speak, how apt and appropriate commemoration is, we should look at a set of criteria that we describe as use ad memoriam and use in memoria. I'll say a little more about that at the end, not detain you right now with it, but we say the key point is it's multidimensional, and not only look at aptness, let's say in aesthetic ways or in an emotional reaction, but there are questions about legitimacy, of people that something has happened to, but there are also questions about intention and just cause, and ultimately consequentialist questions, which one almost needs to zoom out from a little more than in the way that it's presented here as reasonable chance of success. And I'm applying that framework now to these disasters. And so the first one that I originally had it in with was the zoo flooding of 2015 in Georgia, that some of you may have seen. Here are some images that come up if you search for it. What happened there? What happened in the zoo flooding in June 2015? It was, by the scale of what we've heard so far, it was not of that similar magnitude. Of course, numbers only are one indicator of how we look at these things. What happened was that in the summer of 2015, suddenly a big flash flood came through the city and killed both a lot of people and also hit the city's zoo, and ended up causing at a signature place for the city, because it's more or less in the center, or one of the places that one would cross to move around, a place in maybe aptly or bizarrely called, or symbolically also called Hero Square, flooded through that, blocked that. And what also happened in that context, here you see a scale of the destruction of what was the zoo. And I should say, of course, that Georgia is not in the typhoon or hurricane zone otherwise. So these things are not necessarily usual. And you see kind of just a picture of devastation. What happened in the sense of the animals, then the zoo suddenly being flooded, was that some of the animals, especially the animals that could swim, got out. And here you see the kind of the hippo moving around, and you see also the international coverage that attracted. This is, again, just if you do a search, I didn't do a special curation, New York Times, CNN, BBC, Atlantic, The Guardian, etc. So it's all there of these animals, some bears, etc. Then there was a story of a penguin who was, that story came a few days later, of a penguin who swam all the way to Azerbaijan and was caught by border guards in Azerbaijan because it's been swept into the river. Here is the animal once more that was out in the streets. And this entire thing actually continued. So here, this is June 15, continued for a few days. Some of the areas were declared kind of safe. People started coming back. And then here you see a tiger that actually killed, a white tiger that killed a man, and him being covered up there. But this is several days later. So it was declared that it was safe, and people went back, and one man was still killed. What's the narrative that we now can see? And I could say a lot more on that. I want to keep it relatively brief. The main narrative that we right now see in the city, in the area that the flood also hit, so some of this area was affected by the flood. There is a pretty park in it now. There is some kind of flood protection now. But the main narrative is here of the hippo, and you see the white doves coming out. And it's a pretty hippo, yeah, and it's kind of nicely done. And it's has the name of the hippo, Beggy, and the sculptor. And if you look at it more closely, what do we find? It is dedicated to the events of the 13th of June. Yeah, so if we would talk to students, we would say there's a lot of passive voice going on there. Yeah, the events is typically in what gets described there. So here we have a kind of, originally I thought that you could title it not just hippos, but cuties, because it's a cutesy story. Yeah, this is really kind of the cute hippo, etc. And this is not a criticism of the artist, what I say right now. It's only pointing out that something else wasn't so clearly in the mix. Here we have the Prime Minister of Georgia at the time. When you look at the lower bracket, you will see when that he was a prime minister from 2013, end of 2013 until end of 2015. And I think one of the reasons why he was told to step down, that's a complicated story then, this is the lower box, very important, was also that because the crisis management around that zoo flooding was seen as disastrous, as the disaster itself was. Here we have the Minister of Interior who was in charge at the time. And I should say that some of the kind of operations to catch the animals, the zoo people were in despair because the animals were getting gunned down, and the police were enthusiastic that they could shoot animals when the zoo people had wanted to capture them. And you see that he, as a Minister of Internal Affairs, actually resigns in August up here. You can probably not see this, but straight under the picture, and maybe too small for you, it's that the tenure there is relatively short. He then goes on to head the State Security Service, and we will come back to that in a moment. But normally, Minister of Interior is a quite senior position, so you could arguably say that this was a bit of a demotion. If you look through the UNDP report of 59 pages, and you try and find the word accountability, and this was not the only way that I looked at it, that was just accountable. I also scanned it accountable. The word doesn't turn up once in 59 pages. The reason why this matters also is because there was a landslide on June 13. You can see the scale here of the landslide in the image. And this landslide ended up blocking the river upstream. And that was the reason for the zoo flooding, because the river upstream was blocked, the water accumulated. And kind of since the tsunami, we typically know that if water is suddenly gone, you should actually be concerned. And that is what happened at the time. There was less water. So I think there's a very good argument to be made. People have made that argument that maybe after a very big landslide, you might actually want to check out what's happened there. Let me fast forward a little bit. Not fast forward, we're going now to 2022, last year. I'm again showing you the images that come up when you look at the Godavari helicopter crash. And you see some images there. Not all of you may be familiar with it, or I assume none of you are familiar with the details. Let me walk you through. So Godavari is a ski resort in the mountains of Georgia. It has become over the years a very popular spot for paragliding, and especially tandem paragliding, as you can see here. And when you look at what gets shown on the image, it's winter, summer, price. So there's a commercial operation that goes on there, and this drew a lot of people. At the same time, so we go here, 2022, person died, claims the life of one person, paraglider crash. So we had that happen in June 16. And then the following happened, that a helicopter was sent to a few days later for a rescue mission. And here you see the images. And if you have not seen those images and those films, I cannot ask for a show of hands because I don't really see you. But if you have not seen those, it's probably just because at the time, with whatever else was going on, Ukraine, etc., there are so many horrendous images that this didn't draw particular attention. This is on the left is the helicopter that's spiraling down. And on the right is the impact of the helicopter having crashed on the mountains and with 8 people on board. And what had happened in particular, the lower red thing shows you a paraglider. A paraglider had fallen, had crashed with a passenger, was on the mountainside, and the helicopter tried to get close. You see a Mi-8 helicopter, a huge helicopter, and this is the moment when at the tail end of the helicopter, this is a thermal environment, there are thermal updrafts, the tail of the helicopter, tail rotor hits the rock, the tail rotor gets damaged, and then this is what happens is this downward spiral and the total crash. So from having one injured paraglider and another paraglider pilot, paragliding tandem guest, tourist, we suddenly ended up having 8 fatalities from the helicopter, and the debris from the helicopter that was actually falling off while it was spiraling down killed the injured person. So rather than saving anybody, the person that was injured was killed, and another 8 people died. What's the narrative that came out of this? So we had hippos before. Here we have heroes as the narrative. And the Interior Minister, and you will recognize he's back in his position in 2022. The talks about awarding the heroes in that kind of language, giving these awards and here addressing. And if we look at the other narrative that gets put out to think about this, of course, not full memorialization yet, that's still kind of within the context shortly after all of this has happened. But the other context that we see here, snippets from a government-affiliated news site, heroism, full honors, and financial compensation, $35,000. And here we have, again, a minister attends the civil funeral of the heroes that died due to the crash of helicopters. So this is in early August. And the imagery below shows you, again, flags and this being kind of the narrative of heroes. Now, there was some accountability in the sense that paragliding was regulated much more closely, which previously had not been regulated. At the same time, what wasn't really in the mix of the discussion and doesn't remain in the mix with a narrative of heroes was that there was a long-standing practice of really, you could say, heroic or borderline reckless rescue flying. And here is a comment. I aseti magari prina vebi Kravs, we have such cool pilots, exclamation mark. And here you have a helicopter you see hovering over people. And it actually has, when you look at the right-hand side of the image, it actually has a winch. So maybe the winch is not working, but the helicopter pilot decided to fly all the way down, get very, very close to the ground, and this is over a raging river. So there are images where the wheels are almost in the water. And so this was from a few years before. I think there's still a discussion whether it was the same pilot or not. This is what a professional helicopter rescue in the mountain looks like. And I happen to know more about this case, which is why I care about it also and can speak about it, I think, with some knowledge. You see here on the right, in June 2018, so this is several years prior, I had written to a senior person in the Ministry of Economy saying that the sector really needed to be regulated because there were significant risks. And I had said this, the same image here on the left, and you see me in 2019 making the somewhat similar point. And are these single cases? Actually, just this summer, this was after I'd handed in the proposal for the paper, we have something similar in a landslide in Georgia, which again kills a dozen, more than almost 40 people, I think in total, more than 30, were very similar patterns of the river suddenly carries less water, nobody goes to look, etc. Happens. And you could say, does it really matter? But my argument is it actually does, because there are this lack of safety, again, similar to what Gretchen talked about. And there is a pattern there of children getting electrocuted in a well because the wiring is bad, general issues about labor safety, 400 plus traffic fatalities, meaning it is a multiple of what you have in many other countries. And gridlock in the city as parents do not dare to let their children walk home to school. And so I was thinking about calling it in different ways the upcoming apocalypse, upcoming disaster that relates to the first talk that we just heard. And I think, I mean, the term, and it is a bit provocative, yes, but what I call the Georgia's manslaughter state. So does this pattern of memorialization, is that a problem? My argument most likely we'll see a pattern repeating again. Georgia is in earthquake zone. You see these images on the right. Armenia has had a major earthquake 30 years ago, disastrous earthquake, and Georgia has had slight earthquakes. And below here, you see kind of something from the Georgian Cement Association. And here's a statement from the head of the Georgian Cement Association. Of course, an interested party, because they want to sell better cement. But what the head of the Cement Association says is that 63% of the cement samples have failed to meet European standard specifications. And that, so a good chunk, of course, this doesn't mean that 63% of the new buildings themselves are less safe. That might be a strong extrapolation. But when it gets asked by an interviewer in 2020, what in fact may happen to a building that was built using such material? The answer by the president of the Cement Association or the chairman is, let's not go there. So the point being, we're squarely in kind of a massive risk. And so my summary, and that's, sorry if the talk is a bit brief, but I wanted just to kind of illustrate, how do we judge these kinds of accountability? And again, that's not a judgment on, these kinds of memorializations. The hippo, cute, the heroes, hooray, kind of flags, etc., compensation. And I think they, in the absence of a process that also demands accountability, I would say, based on those standards, I can go into that more in the Q&A if you're interested. I would describe that as an unethical commemoration, because it seems like a structured distraction from accountability in terms of the intent. I'm attributing intent here. That is, maybe one doesn't entirely, you don't entirely need to join me in how far you go there. I think it is a contribution to a politics of irresponsibility, and that I tie that to this question of legitimate or criterion of legitimate authority. And I think in terms, we need to think about memorialization also in consequentialist terms. What in the just war tradition is the criterion of reasonable chance of success, where you look forward, what might be the consequences, and zoom out and ask the question, what are the consequences of these particular modes? Again, if they're integrated into accountability, I think that might differ. If they stand alone in themselves and become a replacement or distraction from accountability, I think we have a very significant chance of catastrophic results. I'm not predicting this, I'm not hoping for this, but I do think that we see very similar patterns. And precisely one of the things that we scholars should do is look at these overall patterns of how memorialization sometimes sidesteps what should be a healthy political process. Thank you, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for these thoughtful and very insightful reflections on the ethics of political commemorations and memory cultures. And now the next speaker is Erol Gulum, hello, who is currently at the Humboldt Experienced Research Fellow at the Institute für England und Amerika Studien in Frankfurt Memory Studies Platform at Goethe University. He teaches and publishes on culture studies, folklore, digital culture, memory studies, culture and creative industries, and intangible cultural heritage. And the topic of the presentation will be a future catastrophe in retrospect, mnemonic imagination of the expected Istanbul earthquake on social media.
Well, not really. See, right now? Yeah, that's okay, I think, yeah. First of all, I just want to thank the organizer for this great and tiring organization. It's a great conference. I just learned a lot. Also, it is very nice to be in Warsaw, first time for me. I just see some part of this great city, and I hope I will be here again. Today, in my presentation about future, actually, I just trying to change our paradigm, talking about future in place of past, talking about a little bit on collective memory, collective future thinking in place of collective memory, and most importantly, talking about collective anxiety in place of collective trauma in Turkish context. As you can see, the title of this presentation is Future Catastrophe in Retrospect, Mnemonic Imagination of Expected Istanbul Earthquake on Social Media. First of all, I just want to give some kind of detail about this presentation. The general theme of this presentation is role of collective memory in collective future thinking, which is some kind of hot topic in contemporary memory paradigm, and just trying to give some kind of insight about this dimension of memory studies. But of course, I have to contextualize this theoretical perspective, and for this, I choose the Turkish context. And we have a very great some kind of case in this term, the Istanbul earthquake, and expected Istanbul earthquake, and the 1999 Marmara earthquake. There is some kind of connection between these two, some kind of past disaster and also looming catastrophe in Turkish context. You will see in a minute. My presentation consists of three main chapters. First of all, I just give some kind of background about case, and then I have to delve into a little bit theoretical issues because it's very important to understand this case. And lastly, I will give some kind of analysis, especially focus on representative sample, because there are many kind of digital narrative about this issue. I can't present all of them. Therefore, I just have to give some kind of representative thing to give you idea about whole project. First of all, a disaster past, the Marmara earthquake. This is one of the most important element of collective memory of Turkey. First of all, I have to want to give a little bit background about this. This earthquake occurred August 17, 1999, and it just struck Marmara region, which is one of the important region in Turkey. This is the second smallest, but mostly densest part of Turkey, including Istanbul. The magnitude of this earthquake was 7.4, and it just nearly last 45 seconds, and in this 45 seconds, result in nearly 19,000 fatalities, nearly 49,000 injuries, and also it left back nearly 96,000 unusable buildings. Of course, there are many psychological dimensions of this big disaster. First of all, many research show that there is some kind of chronic disorder such as PTSD, anxiety disorder, depression, and mostly, sadly, especially this trauma of Marmara earthquake also transmit intergenerationally. There are many research show that especially the children of the survivor has some kind of symptom of this trauma. As you can guess, all impact, when we just given all impact, we can see that there is a huge part of place this earthquake in the memory of collective Turkish of memory. For example, we have many research show that flash mob disaster memory, this even turned into flash mob disaster memory. Also, we saw that there are many mediated aspect of this theory because it is widely represented in Turkish mainstream media. Another research showed that this is the either second or third most remembered event in the modern history of Turkey. So it means that it's just one of the most important elements of collective memory culture of Turkey. But I just want to go a little bit further. This research will be innovative because I believe that Marmara earthquake not only shape the collective memory of Turkey, but also play a very important role in collective future thinking, which is one of the most and hottest topic in collective memory studies recently. And actually, this research, after earthquake, after 99 earthquake, many research shows that Marmara earthquake triggered another big earthquake in the same region, and according to primary research, it will be around 30 years. So first research about this was 2000, so it means that we are nearly the end of this time. It means that clock is ticking and it is just approaching. This is not just one individual research, actually. In Turkey, we are doing research systematically. As you can see from the third line, we have, for example, begin from 2030 to 2022. All research has the same idea, and therefore we can say that there is some kind of scientific consensus about this earthquake. And this research shows that it will be around 7.5, which is deadly in Turkish context, especially when you just think about Istanbul, because Istanbul is the biggest city in all Europe and the second biggest city in all world. Nearly 60 million people live in this country, this city, so small, but also therefore we can't totally create some kind of urban transformation for this. Therefore, many research show that the potential impact of this looming catastrophe will be around 30,000 fatalities, and around 50,000 buildings will be destructed if this happens or when this earthquake comes. So when we just look at this relationship between past and future, we can see that there are many representations of this relationality. For example, this issue is widely debated in Turkish media stream, especially recently, because in the beginning of this year we had another big earthquake in the south of Turkey. When we have some kind of earthquake in Turkey, we're always talking about the future, this expected Istanbul earthquake. It is termed like this, or predicted Istanbul earthquake. One of the important dimensions of this media representation is social media, as you guess. And Ekşi Sözlük, one of the most important digital media platform in Turkey, it is also founded in 1999, before the earthquake in Istanbul. And according to statistics, this website in Turkey accessed by nearly 363 million unique users, and it's resulting in nearly 8.1 billion page views. So it means that it is huge. It is not just in Turkish context, it's also globally one of the best social media platform. Ekşi Sözlük, like between Facebook and Twitter, and you can just go there and talk about every kind of issue. But most important topic in this social media platform is always earthquakes. And therefore, we can see that, for example, Marmara earthquake is remembered collectively and collaboratively on this social media platform. For example, we have topic page title 17 August 1999, and it is activated nearly 2000 May 25. Right now, we have nearly 3,000 posts on this title. So most of them about experience of survivor or some kind of representation of this earthquake. But more interestingly, expected or predicted Istanbul earthquake is also collectively imagined in this social media platform, especially the under topic title Beklenen Büyük İstanbul Depremi. We can translate it as a expected Great Istanbul Earthquake. My research focus on this area. It is activated February 2000, so it means that nearly 2 decades this user of this social media platform especially focus on this issue, and they always talking, debating, just sharing some kind of idea about expected or predicted Istanbul earthquake. So most of them, most of these narratives, according to my research, have some kind of capacity and characteristic of being a scenario. We will see what does it mean scenario for this research, but especially I focus on this topic page, and as I said, it has currently 8,000 posts. Most of these posts especially have some kind of quality of being a future scenario about Istanbul earthquake. Most of them focus on aftermath of this expected earthquake. Some of them just especially have some kind of idea about what government should do or how they should behave if this happens. So when we just look at from this perspective, according to my research, most of these posts can be considered cultural, collective, or collaborative manifestation or prospective memory. The 2 days we especially focus on retrospective memory. We especially focus how we remember past. But prospective memory research and collective memory study show that memory is not just about past. Maybe more than past, it is related to future. And this idea, prospective memory, discussed under different concept, but we can easily phrase this as a remembering past to imagine future. It means that if we just trying to imagine a future, we always have to remember something. Our past experience creates some kind of resource for us, and then we just using such a thing to imagine our future. In this case, we see such a relationality. As I said, it is discussed on the concept of collective future thinking or retrospective future thinking. So first of all, before delving into analysis or give some kind of representation sample, we also knew a little bit about the theoretical dimension of this research. As you can see, from episodic memory to futurity of collective memory and recently result in collective future thinking, this topic is first of all discussed by Bartlett, who is one of the most important figures of memory studies. He just redefined remembering as an imaginative construction, and therefore he especially lined remembering with imagination. Tulving and Ingvar also show that, for example, amnesic patient also have some kind of problem to visualizing future. So it means that remembering and imagining just depends on some same neural mechanism. And Schattler and Edis, one of the most important and some kind of prominent figure of this area, argue that we project ourselves into future based on what we remember from the past. So as you guess, this topic is also discussed in the collective memory research. For example, Koselleck came up with the concept of future past. Jan Eschmann argued that collective memory not only reconstruct past, but also organize the experience of present and future. And Aleida Eschmann suggests that the past and collective memory are essential resource for imagining common futures. Lastly, again, Schattler and Welker also saw that collective memory is not necessarily related to past, also connects community to their future, and therefore the way collectively we think is also depends of memory. So when we just look at from this perspective, collective memory research evolved into collective future thinking. And this concept, coined by Karl Spunzar, they define collective future thought as an act of imagining an event that has yet to transpire on behalf of a group. Michel and Sutton just add another layer of this research. They think that we should consider collective mental time travel. So it means that collectively, when we just remember past, also we can imagine our future, and they are on the same line. Roederer recently came with the idea of retrospective future thinking. This is the novel some kind of concept. It is also about collective future thought. So when we just look at from this perspective, this theoretical perspective gives us a very good framework and background to go and do deep analysis. I just use the methodology of digital ethnographic perspective. I approximately review 8,000 posts, and most of these posts, as I said, just have some characteristic of being scenario. Definition of scenario came from Eva Horn. She is one of the most important German cultural theorists, also has a book, Future as Catastrophe, highly recommended. She defines scenario as analytic exploration of possible future involving more and less detailed description of hypothetical sequence of events. So this is our methodological dimension. I also suggest that if you see memory as some kind of swinging pendulum, we can understand better retrospective and prospective dimension of memory. So because our memory always oscillates between past and future, between individual and collective, between lived and imagined experience, and most importantly, it allows people to being between past trauma and future anxiety. So as you can see, this is some kind of representation. Our memory just delve into past dimension. When go this direction, we get some kind of memories, our regrets or etc. But memory doesn't stop there, and then swing in the other side, we get some kind of source from past to imagine our future. And all of them happen in the present. Therefore, this metaphor just works very well because my old scenario just showing some kind of linguistic manifestation of this process. For example, I just defined this analysis, a title as Exploring Oscillatory Acts of Disaster Memory. When we just look at issue from this perspective, we can understand mnemonic imaginational patterns or operation of memory. We can see that collective memory can work as a frame of reference. And most importantly, we can see that people imagining their collective future as a continuation and repetition of origin event of the collective memory. For example, in Turkish context, Marmara earthquake, some kind of origin event. When we're just trying to imagine something about expected or predicate Istanbul earthquake, we always taking some kind of memory from there and create some kind of imagination about this future. So it means that our future scenario always driving from some kind of material from expected Istanbul earthquake. For example, we have two examples here. Two type of scenario can be considered from this perspective. Some scenarios just one line. Some scenarios very, very long. They just define, for example, day by day, even hour and hour, what can happen if this earthquake comes Turkey, just struck Istanbul. For example, one user defined Istanbul earthquake as a natural disaster that reminds itself every August 17th. So it means that you're just trying to make sense of expected Istanbul earthquake, but always using such a thing as getting some kind of thing from the past of this disaster memory of the Marmara earthquake. When we just go another detail, some kind of representation, for example, we can see again this post. I got this post from the title of expected Istanbul earthquake. But when user does trying to create some kind of narrative about expected Istanbul earthquake, as you can see, they delve into area of disaster memory of Marmara earthquake. He defined, he says, I'm quoting, one of those who experienced it, the 1919 earthquake as at epicenter. The year was 2013 when I wrote a note in the corner of my notebook, 13 years later after earthquake. Within 30 years, there will be an earthquake in Marmara of at least same magnitude as the August of 17. So as you can see, some kind of scientific evidence can turn into part of such a narratives. So when we can go a little bit further, we can see that disaster memory of Marmara earthquake not always deliberately and consciously remembered. It just reserved. And we have a very great definition or some kind of terminological choice by Astrid L. She just thinks that this is the trace of implicit collective memory. Because when we just remember something, we do such a thing consciously. We're just trying to remember something. But some memories, especially disaster memories, you don't need to be consciously, deliberately remember. They can reserve. And then after some point, will be in the present. Also, in our case, will be in some kind of part of future narrative. For example, again, this sample shows us, it says, it is one of the possibilities that scare me the most. So user trying to define expected Istanbul earthquake here. But the second line say, I never forget I was collecting tobacco in the field at the dawn of 70 August earthquake. Again, we see that we're just trying to conceptualize or imagine future event, but expected Istanbul Marmara earthquake disaster memory reserve and will be the part of this narratives, and such a things can be considered a trace of implicit collective memory. Another important thing is affective reality of future earthquake. This topic and this dimension of memory is explored by Brian Masumi, who is one of the most important figures of cultural theory, and he just thinks that the future threat has some kind of self-renewing potential, and it can easily turn into some kind of affective reality. Effective reality means that we just imagine something. When we just imagine such a thing, we can re-experience past or pre-experience future. So it means that our user just between pre-experiencing and re-experiencing past and pre-experiencing future. In this example, we can see, for example, it says, imagine if you didn't die in the earthquake, you find yourself buried under tons of concrete, you are stuck in a dark corner, and you wait for days without knowing what end will be. No water, no food, all kinds of insects are wandering around your right and left, and you can't raise your hand and hit them. Rats, darkness, odor of corpse, hunger, thirst, instinct, rats, darkness. As you can see, it's such a repetition of this negative emotion and some kind of intense sensation. I will finish. Last point is the premeditative dimension of disaster memory, and especially in my case, dystopian movies, because we can see that many scenarios especially get some kind of image from dystopian movies or disaster movies and put them into their scenario. For example, a user says, what happens next will be like seen in the post-apocalyptic movies, looting, murder, rape, and fight for survival. And last point is collective memory as a dynamic, ongoing, and responsive process. Because if you remember, in the beginning of this year, we experienced another big earthquake. And this post is just written under expected Istanbul earthquake title 1 day later. And it showed that when Kahramanmaraş earthquake unfolded in front of us, because we watch all details in television, and we can see that such a mediated representation of present earthquake can turn into some kind of resource to imagine or creating some kind of narrative for future. It says, we are watching what will happen to us very soon on television, literally. All Istanbul residents should watch closely that day, whatever will happen to us, being shown step by step with every detail. We will wait in at least this much silence and darkness. Watch carefully. Don't say, does this have to happen to us too? Because it will happen. If something is not done, at least this much will happen. So we watching the Kahramanmaraş earthquake in television, and after some point you got such a representation and trying to understand or trying to create some kind of narrative about expected Istanbul earthquake. Thank you very much for your attention and patience.
Thank you very much, Errol. This was most interesting. And our last but not least speaker is Piotr Juszkiewicz, who is a professor at the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań and art historian. His interests include 20th century art history, contemporary art, and art criticism in the 18th and 20th centuries. He received grants and fellowships from Cambridge University, the Getty Grant Program, Rochester University, and Edinburgh University. He also lectured at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and Art Academy in Tallinn. He is editor and author of numerous publications on art history in Polish and in English. And recently he has curated an exhibition on a new beginning, modernism in the Polish Second Republic in the National Museum in Krakow. And currently he prepares an exhibition on modernism in Poland after the Second World War. He is also a former convener of one of the conferences within the Genealogies of Memory, dealing with art and memory. So the topic of his presentation will be the idea of the collapse of civilization and global catastrophe in the European discourse of the 19th and 20th centuries and its impact on the cultural memory of Europe.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. As you could notice from it, I am not a historian or sociologist, just a humble art historian. So I will start with a seemingly disconnected topic from the main theme of the whole conference, which is past and impending disasters, both natural and man-caused or man-made, and the narratives and forms of memory created about them. In 1934, two young German art historians, Ernst Kries and Otto Kurz, published a book, Die Legende vom Künstler, ein historischer Versuch. They published this small booklet in Vienna. In this booklet, they showed that narrative, as diverse as artistic biographies from antiquity to modern times, are in fact composed of repetitive elements. They are compositions constantly assembled from the same building blocks, of which some are obligatory and others are additional, and that artistic biographies therefore are usually a kind of creation, created according to a fixed pattern or patterns rather than a variable accounts relating to the actual lives of specific individuals. In my view, an important element in the discussion of on the topic of catastrophes and disasters in the 20th and 21st centuries should be then a reflection on the language we used to describe these dramatic moments, and that it is linked at its deepest level to the discourse on global catastrophe and the collapse of human civilization, which were particularly characteristic of the modernization processes taking place in Europe in the 19th and the 20th centuries. I encountered the importance and breadth of this discourse while researching the impact of processes of modernization on artistic creation. In short, the most recurring moment in the modernist discourse appeared to be the conviction that the modern world, but which was meant then European civilization, had collapsed or was on the verge of catastrophe, and therefore a new reality had to be created, and that a new beginning had to be initiated. What is the it is also the title of my exhibition, The New Beginning about modernism in Poland. The point is, recalling an extraordinarily frequently used quote from Wittgenstein, that, I quote, "The boundaries of my language signify or indicate the boundaries of my world." And without going into either picture theory of language nor to more complex issues that Wittgenstein had in mind writing down this passage, let us say that without analyzing the language we use, we will not be aware of the extent to which it determines our way of understanding and describing various phenomena, catastrophes in our case. Because they are, as in the case of artists' biographies, narrated with use of series of narrative schemas, repeated categories and ideas, kind of obligatory building blocks, let's say, of which such a narrative is usually composed. The roots of this discourse lie deep, of course, in the biblical version of global catastrophe, both man-made and perpetrated by the forces of nature, though, of course, in this case, by God's will. But this discourse also has its history. It has been synthesized in an impressive book by the British historian Arthur Herman in his The Idea of Decline in Western History. So I, from time to time, will be referred to his book. To show the intention with a vivid example of what I want to show, let us recall Albert Gore's book, Earth in Balance, from 1992. Albert Gore, former vice president and the candidate for the presidency of the USA, which is a kind, the book of prophecy of the coming global catastrophe. Its central thesis is the belief that modern civilization is essentially entering into collision with the Earth's ecosystem, destroying the spiritual power of human beings who constantly measuring up and distancing themselves from the nature and the Earth by losing direct connection with the vitality and the energy of the rest of the natural world. In this situation, the power holders, also alienated from the nature, direct social aggression towards weak individuals, and the spiritual emptiness of the global society results in the compensation in the form of feverish devastation of our planet. Summarized in this way, the basic thesis of the book reveals that we are dealing with a bizarre compilation, mainly of Martin Heidegger's diagnosis of the modern world and the modern man, in which the history of human spirituality is a process of gradual forgetting of being due to loss of contact with the foundations of Greek culture, and then the pressure of modern civilization. To this, we can add Bergson vitalism and a kind of psychoanalysis superimposed on the Marxist idea of alienation, degrading, according to its proponents, the members of modern society. Let us add to this a kind of pantheism, a belief reflected, according to Gore, in all the world religions, that the biosphere is a single organism, a self-regulating ecological mechanism, continuously threatened by man, who is fundamentally an enemy of nature, and which, if not curbed in his urges, will lead to global catastrophe. Let us, however, go back in time to show, in a nutshell, of course, of several centuries of discourse that have been so remarkably compiled in Gore's argument. First of all, we must mention Jacques-Jean Rousseau, as according to Herman, the first critic of civilization, who, denying the notion of civilizational progress, considered it precisely as a threat to the true nature of man and his freedom. Then let me to point out to the peculiar biologization of the question of the impending global catastrophe through the question of race that was taking place around the middle of the 19th century, the example of which is Arthur de Gobineau's essay on the equality of races from 1853-1855. He considered the process of civilization as a process of rolling corruption, of racial degeneration, the result of abandoning the great heritage of mythical Aryans. His thought was continued by Houston Chamberlain, who transformed Aryans into Teutons, and we know the consequences in the Nazi ideology. The next important step in this discourse was the notion of atavism, what meant traits seemingly lost in the evolutionary process, but which can reappear under certain conditions and then be passed on in the process of inheritance to the next generation. Atavism could emerge and intensify under the influence of modern civilization, which causes the degeneration of human race, especially of the poor strata of society, as Benedict Morrell or Cesare Lombroso were convinced. The harbingers of the expected catastrophe are the rise of poverty, crime, alcoholism, moral perversion, and political violence. As a general rescue to such a threat, many thinkers and activists have welcomed eugenics, a term coined by Francis Galton in 1883 to refer to the science of breeding the well-born, so-called the well-born. Eugenics meant for him and many institutes of eugenics in the whole Europe and in the US in the first decades of the 20th century, the correction of the degeneration of the Western societies in a humane and scientific way. We can see strong support for Dalton's eugenics between radicals and socialists of the first decades of the 20th century, including George Bernard Shaw, Herbert Wells, Sidney and Beatrice Webb from the Famines Society, Havelock Ellis, famous sexologist, and Margaret Sanger, a founder of American Birth Control League. In such a context, we should also remember the expression of fear of degeneration appearing in mass culture. I mean, for example, Robert Stevenson, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1886 described the dualism of modern man. From the one hand, civilization and the atavistic self from the other. Civilization from this point of view turned out to be founded on the repression of the animal side of man. And the second example could be Abraham Stoker, who is in Dracula from 1897, showed how the process of degeneration destroys the seemingly safe and protected retreat of civilized life. Let me also recall Max Nordau, whose Degeneration from 1892 was the bestseller, translated in various languages. He found degenerates not only among criminals or prostitutes, but also, maybe in particular, also among writers and artists. Important part of discourse was produced by a new generation of anthropologists from the beginning of the 20th century, like Franz Boas, Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, who elevated status of tribal societies relative to advanced society and often suggested that primitive people often preserved the mental health and vitality that the civilized West had lost. Civilization, they claimed, was built on a rejection of the vital instincts. We must remember also about the great narrators of the collapse of civilization and the prophets of its renewal. I mean Friedrich Nietzsche, Miguel Unamuno, Ortega y Gasset, Oswald Spengler, Florian Znaniecki. Spengler, for example, understood culture as the opposite of civilization. The properties of the latter that mark the end of a given world were intellectualism, cosmopolitanism, uniformity, the power of money, technology, practicalism, as well as popular culture and liberal parliamentarism. Let's jump now to Frankfurt School, according to which Western capitalism creates a neurotic and dysfunctional human type that emerged not only in bourgeois society, but also among its fascist antagonists. Erich Fromm and Herbert Marcuse were convinced that the hope for human freedom lies in the effort to tear down the bourgeois mechanism of psychological repression as much as class one. All the ills of modern society for which physiological degeneration had been blamed, social decay, crime, madness, suicide, neurosis, alcoholism, the degradation of art, even anti-Semitism, now became the fault of capitalism and consequently of the modern West. The members of the school created also a new cultural hero, the writer, teacher, intellectual, using the typewriter or the nowadays a computer, or the classroom as a tool to attack and expose the contradictions and evils of Western civilization. The typical modern man for them was the psychological cripple, the authoritarian personality, seeking strong authoritarian figures, mass movements, and charismatic leaders. In Marcuse's writings, philosophy of soul-destroying civilization was turning into a theory of consumer society, hiding its true repressive nature behind an abundance of goods and services. Important figure of this part of discourse was also Christopher Lasch, an American historian who also used the psychoanalytic language of the Frankfurt School. The way out for him was not socialism, but a Nietzschean return to instinct. He called for local communities which would be able to express Gemeinschaft against science, technology, the corporate state, and racism. For other critics, the noble barbarian revealed himself as a third world villager or ghetto dweller, impulsive, strong in body and spirit, with more energy than the degenerate Western citizen. We can notice the importance of the phenomenon of regenerative journeys. Then, for example, political pilgrimages, for example, to Fidel Castro or Kwame Nkrumah. Che Guevara, for example, in this context, became the fulfillment of the idea of the authentic man, and above man, pilgrimages was due to regain faith in the human race. The latest incarnation of the idea of the decline is modern environmentalism, as also an ideology and maintains the 19th century fear of technology and degeneration. The damage being done to the environment brings, in this perspective, the declining phase of dying civilization closer to becoming history. Similarly, Spengler and other critics of civilization thought that the threats to organic culture were the machine and capitalism. In 1960s, overpopulation was added to these threats. Ecologists are recently in general centered around the Nietzschean slogan, return to earth. I mean the Zarathustra and his idea of eternal return and love of earth. This is a repetition of the same enthusiasm that animated every modern regeneration movement since German Romanticism, and we can see a link between the vitalist philosophy of life and the today ecological movement. After the First World War, ideas of return to nature can be found into various political movements. Let's mention also in this context, famous Charles Reich's Greening America from 1970, Hippie Bible, in fact, where he describes contemporary disorder, corruption, loss of sense of community, meaningless culture, and common sense of powerlessness. This diagnosis was associated again by Nietzschean-style remedy, namely breaking down the artificial constraints of technological society through style of dress and hairstyles, rock music, and sexual freedom. Let's also mention Murray Bookchin in his Crisis of the Cities from the 1966. And in contrast, he hoped that technology let us survive in the world where cities spread like a spreading cancer, destroying wildlife, farmland, and waterways. Technology, according to him, has two sides, destroys, but also protects natural resources, solar, wind power, etc. And primitive society, again, can be seen as a new model of the future. Primitive man and the nature created a pattern of fertility and well-being. Future society should be, according to Bookchin, a confederal commune of communes with organic agriculture, solar energy, lots of free time for gardening, crafts, reading, recitation, poetry, and so on. The notion of property, even collective property, will disappear, replaced by an ecologically oriented economy. Everyone should consider himself as a citizen, not as a self-interested ego. We can see clear recollection from a famous novel by William Morris, News from Nowhere. So Gore's book then sums up and compiles, not necessarily in a harmonious way, the various strands of catastrophic discourse present also in European cultural memory. It puts modern Western civilization on trial as a phenomenon alien to human nature, threatening the humankind and the natural environment. It allegedly degenerates the biosphere, and repressive cultural norms distort the human psyche. The rescue and the remedy seems to be rejection of this civilizational ballast and the eventual transformation the Earth's inhabitants into sympathetic and harmless, but also docile Eloise. Of course, I refer to the Time Machine by George Wells. And we are talking about Eloise. We should remember about Morlocks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We still have 20 minutes for discussion, and we had here 5 really most impressive and most interesting presentations. Thank you all for that. My idea is that we had like the first 2 talks were more about cultural commemorations, processes of cultural commemorations of events related to natural history, to natural disasters, and the first 3 and the last 2 presentations were more about collective traumas related to environmental issues and how they are constructed within culture. So on the one hand, social culture and these future memories, and on the other hand, this high discourse, intellectual, philosophical, but still 2 different fields of cultural elaboration. Maybe I will start with 2 questions to all the speakers, and then you can either react to them or not, and we can move to our audience and to their questions as well. So one would be to what extent would you say that cultural commemorations and imaginations of natural disasters are commemorating these events and the victims, and to what extent they are indeed abusing the memory or misusing the memory? To what extent we could say that actually they are some kind of screen memories, in Freudian sense, cover memories for something else that was not commemorated at the time. And another question is, are the natural disasters a natural component for more universal global memories? To what extent these events are remembered, commemorated within the specific local contexts, specific national contexts, and to what extent they have the potential for creating more universal global communities of remembrance. Who wants to start? I think it's now.
Oh, thanks for these questions. It's very hard to provide some sort of a very structured answer to them. I mean, it would, again, I think, kind of require some sort of a back and forwards towards certain theoretical notions I mentioned. Maybe two very brief things, and the second one, if I may, this is a kind of a sort of a narrative strategy. I will try to answer it and then present it as a question to Errol, so if to kind of to make it more dynamic and interactive, of course. I mean, I liked your idea of how the local kind of resonance, what's the local resonance with some sort of a transnationalism, right? And I think the case of Skopje, and especially my take on Skopje, and if you allow me to kind of repeat myself here, is that actually beyond this very transnational branding of solidarity, which actually the city assumed very early after the disaster, there is a set of local kind of entanglements which in a way not necessarily always communicate with the branding which came from the top. So it came from the top as a sort of this international community-driven branding by naming of the city as a sort of a way to kind of legitimize the whole support it received from the UN, but also the other set of organizations. But on the other hand, the local kind of activities are not necessarily always kind of had this sort of understanding of solidarity when kind of commemorating this sort of things. And this is visible in many and different occasions during the course of the year, practically during the time period which I explored. I'm trying to think about some sort of examples which might illustrate my point the best. But here I would have to refer mostly to the kind of again to the personal histories and how in a way certain families which so the internal displacement within the city are very interesting in these regards. Also, the whole idea behind the displacement of the Roma community is very interesting. So it's as a counterpoint to this solidarity, city of solidarity, and actually it was in the 60s and the 70s when the Roma community was actually displaced, which was very much dispersed across the city and actually displaced within the post-earthquake reconstruction to the outskirts of the city. And then the second point, very briefly, is related, and I very like this idea of kind of this social psychology backing of this whole notion of remembering. Of course, I'm not a social psychologist myself, but actually there is something which I was writing about, and also there is a recent paper by Astrid Earle, I believe, this whole idea of revoking flashbulb memories into this cultural memory paradigm. And it's very interesting to see, because for such natural disasters, this whole initial debate about flashbulb, but also receptive events, so the field where this information was received it's very interesting because it was somehow dropped after 20, 30 years. It was kind of proposed due to the fact that people tend to forget both the flashbulb and the receptive events. And it was somehow then, and this is my reading, of course, when this whole idea of narrative and rehearsal kind of got prominence. So in a way, how the repetitive, the way that the stories, the personal stories are repeated as well as the cultural memory is very much informing the way it's being remembered. And I believe this somehow partially responds also to Małgorzatas question, but it's also a very interesting approach towards the social media, because the social media provides a very interesting platform for repeating and narrating. So we don't have to go to the people and ask them about the earthquake experience, but they can write it in the comments, and this whole interaction between the comments actually a way of seeing those. So this is, I mean, if you have any reflection on this, it's fantastic what you're doing, and I would like to maybe hear more here or afterwards. So I will stop here. Sorry for the long.
In my case, a little bit easier, because as my friend says, especially when we just look at the digital ecology, this is some kind of transnational context. For example, some user of this social media platform live outside of Turkey, for example, Germany or other kind of place. And when you just have some computer and you write your experience or memory of such a thing, it makes it transnational. But also we have some kind of, in Istanbul case, different layer, because Istanbul is not just transnational kind of city, but also transcontinental. Some of part of it in Europe, part of it in Asia, and it just makes Istanbul or Marmara earthquake, in my case, some kind of transnational memory. And when you just look at from this perspective, as I said in my presentation, it is just not local, national, but also regional and even globally important place. And when something happens in Istanbul, it can be just everybody can write on these kind of things. There are many representation of such a thing in international media coverage. So especially in my case, as I said, digital media, just as there is no center, and that's why it can easily turn into some kind of platform to not just remembering, but also imagining what can happen, especially in, for example, predicate Istanbul earthquake. So I can say this kind of thing.
Maybe our guest online?
Gretchen? Yeah.
Okay, I think I can contribute a little on the second question. The thing in the Philippines is that I did have it here. No? The Philippines has the World Risk Report in 2022 placed the Philippines as the one with the highest risk of experiencing disasters. So we've been experiencing disaster after disaster every year. So the tendency is, even even if something like Sendong had happened, which killed a lot of people, the tendency it could be buried with all the other disaster events that had happened ever since, and we are expecting a lot more of that. Right now, we are in the El Nino or drought season, so we don't have that. But the tendency really is for the disasters to be forgotten, easily, because we've had really like a lot of more stronger storms in the past. But in terms of memorializing, I would really say that in the Philippines, becomes routinary. Like it's not really something like, okay, because this is done, we should do this. This is recommended by the UN or no. So the tendency in the Philippines is written, okay, this year is the anniversary of Sendong, so we need to commemorate it. And in fact, ever since there are actually 3 memorials dedicated to Sendong. I did not discuss the other one because it was not really very significant. It was much hidden in the city. But ever since those memorials have been erected, there's really not much. The thing that could connect the memorializing in the Philippines, I think, would have to be those that were what do you call it, aid that were given by Japan, because Japan has a very strong generational transmission of disaster memory, so that they are prepared for the tsunami and the earthquakes. And so they have been the ones that have helped. I showed the picture of the city with the big bridges already, and that was funded by Japan. The literature on disaster memory also points to infrastructures that are erected to prevent another occurrence of the same thing. So that's a form of disaster memory. So I think that's the that's the only thing that I could connect. Like, how does the local commemorations and memorializing in the Philippines, how it connects to at least for Sendong, because there are other, like Haiyan is I don't know, it's universally known as the strongest storm to have hit. So it's quite well known. But in Sendong, that's the only way I could connect it with how it is how its memorializing can be connected to the rest of the world. Yeah, I think I hope I made sense there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. And Hans, would you like to contribute something?
Yes, 1 second. So, I mean, I think the appropriate framework for thinking about some of these questions does need to be a framework. Otherwise, you're improvising case by case. And I think the structure of some of the debates, the reason why they're, so to speak, inchoate in many cases is precisely because one hasn't zoomed out. And I try to show an application of that framework relatively quickly. And I do think commemoration, we need to be clear about that. There's a political component to that. And we need to be clear that what we're discussing there is often a question, do we think it's right or do we think it's not right? Yeah, in that sense. And that's an ethical question. It's not an aesthetic question. It's not a genealogical question in the end, because genealogy is kind of linked to a particular mode of actually tracing how terms change over time. It's a Nietzschean endeavor, so to speak, and the ethics need to be brought back into that context. And so I think that's important, and that is also goes to your question about how do we relate to what's online and not. A lot of the online things are, I mean, that debate has been there with in various cases that, is it hacktivism? Is it slacktivism? Do these online commemorations in the end, do they sidestep the political component? And I think that's a question we need to address. So in terms, should we make us feel part of a greater whole? I mean, I didn't talk about these criteria on the right that we have about the use in memoria, what it should do. I mean, I think first and foremost, it should help strengthen us be citizens. And that's actually not so much be part of a broader solidarity. That comes almost in a second step. but me as an individual asserting my moral autonomy of how I relate to this particular thing. And I think if it starts potentially going in the direction of conscripting people into groups, I think that's tricky in various ways. And if to the extent that there are collectives there, which often are there as collectives of victims, I think it's most compelling if there's a transformative component there also. Now, we've said more about this. This is just a nutshell. But again, I think a sensible debate of that is not, how to speak, letting different chess figures run across the board and nobody entirely understands what the debate is about, but really going back to being very clear that this is an ethical debate and trying to solve that with the tools of being historians or trying to solve that with the tools of some other discipline simply doesn't work, because it is in the end an ethical debate, and we need to tie that to an ethical tradition that has concerned itself with precisely these questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And just a very short comment. And I think that there is a visible link between my presentation and my neighbor's presentation. I mean the problem of repetition of different motives. And I totally agree. When we are thinking about constructing our future, we usually use the element of our past. But the problem is that the question is what resources of past we are going to use and how these resources are shaped. I think a very interesting example where Sergiusz Eisenstein, now he's... When Sergiusz Eisenstein tried to make a film, his famous film under the title October, he hired men and women who remembered very clearly the moment of the outbreak of the revolution in Petersburg. But as you know, as you can see when you are watching this movie, his movie is not exactly the same as the real events and history was. And one British sociologist said then when people then said that they remember October Revolution, they had Sergiusz Eisenstein film in their minds. So we can be very careful. Thank you.
Very good conclusion. It could be, but we are still open to questions from the audience. Or is everyone already very tired and satisfied? Okay, so let's give some applause to our panelists. Thank you very much.